Hello everybody! It's no secret that makeup tends to be very similar these days with all the launches coming out. It is inevitable that you have certain key themes and iterations of products floating around, making a lot of different brands release products that are relatively similar. So I have decided to spotlight this on my channel by specifically focusing on this in relation to eyeshadow palettes. I have started a series of sorts on this channel in which I talk about different categories of eyeshadow palettes and how they can be so very similar. The first video that I did in this series was all about green eyeshadow palettes and how so many of them are similar, and then the next video that I did was all about rainbow themed eyeshadow palettes and how they're all very similar, and now I'm doing pops of blue. Guys, when I was preparing for this video, I literally thought I had only like 1 or 2 palettes with pops of blue in them. I have 5, and yeah, they all have pops of blue in them. And see, the thing is, the way I'm going to do this video is I'm going to spotlight palettes that are mostly neutral, might include like a few colors in there, but have very strong pops of blue that actually do carry that palette. So, a very good example of a palette with a pop of blue would be the KKW Beauty and Mario palette. Mine is a little bit filthy because I actually do use this palette quite a lot because this blue is beautiful. So this is what this palette looks like. Obviously very neutral, and they have that pop of blue, which is the selling point of this palette, as pops of blue most often are. Also, this is actually a big regret. This ColourPop Mar palette, oh my goodness, this is a pop of blue in like a very warm tone palette, and then they have made it like a cool themed color scheme when really it's like literally 1 pop of blue, 2 greeny shades, and then like everything else is like neutral. It is so like this is not a palette that I like. Then I have the Lorac Pro 2 palette. I actually like, for a long time I was using this color for my eyebrows. That's why I have hit pan on it so much. But yes, this definitely has a pop of blue in there as well. I know for a fact that this blue actually sucks. It is so bad. I hate it. It's bad. And then I have the Anastasia Beverly Hills. What is the World Traveler palette? This is such a pretty palette, or this was when it came out, but this is definitely a pop of blue, and it is right over here. And I'm not a very big fan of this blue, if I do say so myself, but this palette is quite pretty, so I keep it around. And then this is the Masquerade palette by Juvia's Place. The only reason I'm mentioning it in this video is because I do think that out of all the palettes I just mentioned, these are probably the best blues that I own. The second best blue in my collection would be from this palette right here. This is actually really great. But if you're looking for like pops of blue in like a colorful and neutral palette, this is a great option, and I'd actually really recommend this. But now that you've seen the palettes that I already own that are full of pops of blue in there, I want to show you some palettes that I found on the internet, and you will realize how similar these palettes are. A whole bunch of these palettes use blue as a selling point, and that's actually why a whole bunch of brands do pops of like color in their palettes, because it allows them to market the palette more easily and sell it more easily when it's a kind of basic palette. The very first palette that actually like just blew my mind when it launched, because it was getting so much hype, and I was kind of like, this is literally the most basic palette. I don't care what the quality is. It's the most basic color scheme. It is so boring. That accolade would go to the Beige Cosmetics Desert Oasis palette. It is literally like a face and eye palette, which I don't like even on its own, but this has so many neutrals in it, and then you have 2 pops of blue, and one of them is actually so close to gray, it's actually more of a gray, and you have like 1 true blue in there, and it's everything else. Sorry, my chair just made a noise. Everything else is neutral, and this, it's so like, it's such a boring palette. I really don't like it. I really don't like it at all. Another example of a pop of blue can be found in this 9-pan Morphe palette. So I'm editing for this video, and I found 2 palettes on Morphe's website that look so similar, so I'm just going to put them both in this video, and we're going to talk about them as if they're the same palette, because guess what? They might as well be, because they look so similar. I am so noisy in this video. I'm so sorry. This 9-pan Morphe palette right here. So, looking at this palette, you're like, it's kind of a blue themed palette, isn't it? No, it's not. If you actually look at the colors one by one, if you actually look at this palette objectively, you will find that this is a pretty much like a cool tone neutral palette with like one pop of blue in there. Definitely not inspiring whatsoever. Then you have this brand right here called Me Love a Lot, and this came out like a little bit ago, but this is basically like a little bit of an under the radar brand. They seem to have like a very interesting like aesthetic and marketing, but this is definitely a palette that has a pop of blue. Yes, they have like a little bit of teal in there as well, so that actually makes it a little bit more interesting in my opinion. But this is like, I would think this is definitely one of the more interesting palettes with a pop of blue in them, because it's very small, it's very curated, and you have like two colors in there, not just that one pop of blue. You also have that teal, but I still would call this a pop of blue because that blue really draws your attention. Then moving on, ColourPop with their Elsa palette. This is essentially like an Elsa themed palette, right? But then you look at the colors and you have essentially like a very like some icy colors in there, so that matches the theme of Elsa, sure. But then you have so many like neutral-ish colors. You have like those like berry colors that honestly like have no place in an Elsa palette, and then you have one pop of blue in an Elsa palette. She has a beautiful blue gown that she's always wearing, for crying out loud. Like, just put in some other blues. And there's a pressed glitter in there. Very sad. But moving on, MAC did a collection that was basically like a Chinese New Year collection, and this had a lot of stuff in there, but one of the things they included was this eyeshadow palette with 9 pans, and it was very neutral with one pop of blue. Do you notice the theme? All of these palettes look so similar. A palette that's a little bit more interesting is from In Love Cosmetics. And this is basically the Vantage palette, and you have a lot of like really beautiful like just warm tones in here, but then again you do have like that very bright pop of blue. But what's nice about this palette is that the other colors are so vivid that they really add to the blue in the palette instead of like just making the blue look like a sore thumb, basically. I feel like this color scheme works a little bit better than some of the other color schemes that we've been seeing in this video so far, because this palette is in my mind a little bit more of a colorful palette with a few neutrals in there, but because of the inclusion of color, the pop of blue doesn't necessarily look as out of place as a lot of pops of blue tend to be. This next color scheme is from the brand called Velvet 59. This is an indie brand, and they came out with like this beautiful selection of like pinks, but then they have like one pop of blue in there, and it's kind of like, I will admit, that blue kind of fell out of place in my personal opinion. I feel like if they had maybe like just put in maybe like a little bit less pink and a little bit more like blue and purple, it probably would have worked, but this is definitely a pop of blue in a palette. Another palette that's actually quite similar is from Love Lux Beauty, and yeah, basically lots of pinks, a little bit of neutrals, and that pop of blue. That is pretty much like right at the center of the palette. This is the new Sweet Summertime palette, by the way. Then this is the brand Ronnie Cosmetics. Now, the owner of Ronnie Cosmetics is actually Total Makeup Junkie 101. I've watched like a few of her videos in her past. She has like a really great review channel. The swatches in here do look quite nice, but at the same time, like, this is a pop of blue palette. This blue is very vivid. It kind of carries the entire palette, thus in my mind qualifying as a pop of blue in a palette. Bombshell Cosmetica basically had this palette right here that had like a whole bunch of shades in it. It was food inspired, fast food inspired, and then they had that pop of blue. The only thing that's interesting about this is the packaging, and even that's like not that interesting. Oh yeah, this was like a launch that I didn't necessarily understand too much. This was from NYX Cosmetics. They collaborated with Aquaria to release this palette right here, which honestly looks so desaturated, except for like a few pops of color, specifically those two like bluey tones that are seen in the palette as well. What I don't understand about this palette is how it can be so desaturated and so colorful at the same time. It's kind of confusing. I'm not sure how that worked out. Oh yes, another example would be from Lunar Beauty. This is a Strawberry Dreams eyeshadow palette. Objectively a really pretty palette, but you do have pops of blue in here, and they kind of like carry the mood of the palette overall. Smashbox, goodness gracious. They had these cover shot palettes, and one of these is called the Denim cover shot palette, and this is such a good example of a pop of blue because you have essentially like very neutral shades, like very mundane, neutral, typical shades in here with like 3 pops of blue. But those 3 pops of blue are nestled in like this sea of like tan eyeshadow. So it's kind of like, how do you expect us to create looks with this palette? How is that done? How can that be done? I'm curious to know because I don't know. Probably one of the better color stories in this video because yes, this is in my mind a pop of blue, but I do think that this palette definitely has so much to offer that it makes it so much more interesting. That blue is supported by so many other shades. I'm talking about the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. When this came out, I wasn't particularly interested in it, but looking at it from the pop of blue perspective, I really do like this palette compared to all the other palettes in this video because it looks a little bit more interesting. Bobbi Brown came out with one of the best examples of a pop of blue in palettes when she came out with this Holidays 2019 launch. This is basically the Luxe Gems eyeshadow palette, and it is pretty self-explanatory. You have so many colors in here, well, so many neutrals, and 1 pop of blue that ultimately carries the entire palette. Without this pop of blue, this palette would be boring. Same thing with Stila. They came out with their holiday collection, and in that collection was like this palette that was 6 pans, and they had like a whole bunch of like very muted tones, but then that pop of blue in there that was just there. It was just present. It was just there for us to see it, and it was just there to carry the palette and make it more appealing. Another example would be again from Morphe. This is their New Year's Eve collection, and they basically had the 10M Midnight Gleaming Artistry palette with very muted shades and then that pop of icy blue. I feel like I'm just repeating myself so much in this video. Anastasia Beverly Hills and Amrezy came together to collaborate and create this palette right here, which really is a good example of a pop of blue because while this palette has like a really beautifully done, aesthetically pleasing pink and neutral theme, you have like that pop of blue that was just like, that looks like it was just like plopped in there for no better reason than to just make the palette more appealing. But it honestly, I think in this case, that pop of blue distracted from what could have been like a very beautifully cohesive, pinky neutral color scheme that actually looked quite nice even without the blue, in my personal opinion. I feel like I've been a little bit redundant in this video because so many of these palettes are so similar, but it just goes to show, let me just pop all the palettes, well, pop a few of the palettes on the screen right now. It just goes to show that so many of these palettes are so similar because you're getting, or if you're me, okay, you're looking at these palettes and you're thinking, oh my goodness, look at that color. But then 80% of the palette are shades that you probably already have in your collection, and then 20% of the palette are shades that are actually relatively colorful or interesting or anything of that nature. But yeah, I just think that honestly that palettes with like a pop of blue are such a waste of money sometimes because, well, this is not all the time, and this is just my opinion. I think that they're kind of a waste of money because essentially you're buying them because you're drawn in by that blue, if you're me, and then you end up not using most of the palette because you only got it for the blue or some of the other colors, and it just ends up being like a palette that you're not that inspired by. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching till the end of the video. I do hope you enjoyed it, found it interesting, inspiring, entertaining, and I will see you all tomorrow. Bye guys.